Stuff we use year-round in Houston. Air conditioning.
You guys getting some cool air back there?
Yep.
We use our grills.
All right, dinner's almost ready.
And yet we definitely always use our common sense.
Trying to make a program that would have common sense.
Common sense isn't so common.
No, it just makes so much sense.
So right now, join lifelong Houstonian Bill King as we take on the issues with a little bit of Houston common sense.
Common sense.
It's time for Common Sense.
This is Common Sense with Bill King. Here's Bill.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the second edition of Common Sense Talk Radio. Today, we're going to be talking all things transit. We're going to be talking about transit generally and about Metro specifically. And let me tell you what, we have scored the two top head honchos at Metro. We have on today Carrin Patman, who's the board chair. And before being the board chair, she was on as a board member back during the Parker administration. So she's got, 8 or 10 years experience at this, really knows her stuff. And then also the president and chief executive officer, Tom Lambert, is with us, who is an old friend of mine. We go back, Tom, I guess, to the Hurricane Evacuation Task Force many years ago. And then finally, we've got Tory Gattis. Tory is the senior founding fellow at the Center for Opportunity Urbanism. He writes a popular Houston blog, Houston Strategies, which appears also in the Houston Chronicle as Opportunity Urbanist. And he's a TED speaker, and he is one of the really great thinkers in Houston about urban development and transportation. Hello, everybody. So glad to have you all here today.
Well, hey, Bill, thanks for having us, and hello, Tory.
Hey, Carrin.
All right, so I'd like in this first segment to sort of concentrate on Metro and specifically what the pandemic, what effect it's having on Metro. So, Tom or Carrin, whichever you want to answer that, can you give us sort of a general overview of how's the epidemic affecting Metro? How's it forced you to change and adapt? Just kind of tell us what's going on with respect to that particular issue.
Yes, well, of course, it has affected us greatly, as it has everyone. It's affected our ridership, our finances, the way we go about business. We've had to make a lot of changes to comply with CDC protocols and even go beyond those. And really, our primary focus right now is on preventing spread of COVID-19 and keeping our riders and employees in the community safe. So everybody's really devoting their energies to that right now while continuing to do everything else that needs to be done. And we've found we've adapted in all sorts of ways, of course. We've put into place many protocols to try to protect folks on our system, our drivers, our riders, and then the community at large, so as to flatten the curve. Among the things we've done are we started with enhanced cleaning on buses, rail cars, other vehicles and facilities way early on, and disseminating the CDC protocols like wash your hands before and after you get on, don't touch other people, socially distance. And then we began to enforce social distancing, where we would put tags on the seats showing where you can sit and where you cannot, so as to maintain at least a 6-foot distance. We also suspended fares so that people can board from the rear of the bus and not get within 6 feet of the driver. And, the first people that board can go up so they don't have to pass everybody else. And except for disabled folks that have to board from the front, that's worked very, very well. We now are encouraging operators to wear masks. They all have masks, and we encourage the riders to wear masks too. And if someone shows up and doesn't have a mask, we can provide one as long as we can maintain our supply. And so far, we do have plenty. Obviously, we don't let employees who are sick come into work, and we've also implemented temperature checks so that when someone shows up to work, whether to get on a bus and drive or to be in the offices, we give them a temperature check. And I think now the protocol is if they have 100 or more, they're not supposed to work. Temperatures fluctuate, as we all know, but 100, first it was 100.4, now it's 100. And we continue to advertise all of the CDC protocols, and so we're just doing everything we can, and I think it's had an impact.
Tom, let me ask you about your employees. I know I've seen media reports that you have had some people test positive in your employees. Are those people that are out operating the vehicles? Are they people in your staff? Tell us a little bit about what you found with your employees.
Well, Mayor, we've had, and the chair can speak more to this as well, we've had 17 employees that have tested positive. Of those 17 employees, 9 have been bus operators, and the others have really been staff support. We've had 1 police officer, we've had rail cleaners, we've had dispatchers in our MetroLift call center. So out of the 17 employees, 9 have been operators of the buses. And I'm very pleased to say, too, that I've had an opportunity to talk to all those employees. They're all doing well. Some have actually returned back to work. So we're very, very blessed that those that have been had a positive test result, they are overcoming and they're doing well, and some are coming back. So that's kind of the breakdown there we've seen of the 17 employees. I would also note that we also had 2 contractors that provide MetroLift services for us. They had 2 positives as well, and those employees are doing well also.
So that sounds like you're about the same ratio as the general population is. I mean, you don't have any particular concentration or anything.
We don't. We've it's really funny because funny is probably the wrong word. I mean, funny in the curious sense, but you think you're doing all of these things, and how could even one person get sick? But, of course, they're exposed to the rest of the community as well, and so we are just doing our best with it. But, yes, we have a very low concentration.
I mean, they have people infected in the White House right now, so I'm pretty sure it's going to get some Metro employees. Can you tell me about your testing protocol is, and have you all done any antibody testing of your employees?
Tom, why don't you take that one?
Mayor, we have not done. We have really focused in working directly with the city and the county public health officials. We do have staff designated from our Human Resources Department so that we have one-stop communication coordination. So as we have had a positive result, we've been communicating that to the city and the county health departments, giving them specific information of when the employee last worked, if it's an operator. I think have you seen in our media releases, we've been including the routes they work, the days they work, the times they work, to make sure that we've been very open and transparent to provide as much information as we can. So if someone were, as an example, on a bus operated by an operator that tested positive, we've encouraged them to reach out to their doctor. We've encouraged them to make sure that they're communicating the appropriate information they need to their healthcare provider, and then to work with the healthcare practitioners should they come down with symptoms. So we've had a very direct communication and a link with our HR department with the city and county public health departments.
Okay, great. Look, we're already to our first break. I can't believe the time is passing so fast. So we're going to be right back in about 4 minutes after we pay some bills here. So if everybody will hang on, we're going to get to some of these other questions. Hang on for more Common Sense Talk Radio. All righty, here we are. It's Bill King back with Common Sense Talk Radio. We're talking transit today with Metro Board Chair Carrin Patman, Metro CEO Tom Lambert, and Houston blogger about all things urban and transit, Tory Gattis. I want to come back and could either Carrin or Tom, could y'all tell us how dramatically has this affected your ridership at Metro?
One of the interesting.
Go ahead, Madam Chair.
Oh, yes. And one of the very interesting things about this is that it has demonstrated the essential nature of transit for the region, because on a normal day we carry, say, 270,000 a day, or give it that many rides, and then now we are still giving 100,000 rides a day. So people are needing our services to get to the medical center. The medical center needs our services to get their employees into work. And we are significantly down, but we still are carrying a large number of people.
And what are y'all thoughts? If you thought about as the economy begins to open back up and the virus subsides, hopefully, what do you think about how anxious or ready riders going to be to come back and get on these kinds of joint conveyance vehicles in the future?
Well, we do know that the businesses who rely on our transporting their riders are very concerned about it, but also very eager for us to get back into service. There's a little bit of a chicken and egg issue in that the businesses need our services to reopen, and yet we don't want to reopen until we can be fully safe. And so we're looking at that, and Tom may be able to speak to that. But, of course, on our park and rides, for example, we're going to need to enforce social distancing for a while. We're going to need extra capacity. It may require staggering work hours so that we don't have full park and ride buses, because right now many of our park and rides operate at capacity during peak hours. And so in order to keep everybody in line with the protocols, we're going to have to do some things differently and work with the businesses to do that. Tom, do you have anything to add to that?
I just want to build off of that. We're working, of course, with the Greater Houston Partnership on their communications about Reopen Houston and making sure that we're communicating with all the business leaders to get a sense of when they intend to bring their employees back. As the chair mentioned, I think looking at opportunities to do staggered report times, where you have folks that stagger days at work. So we're working hand in hand with our business leaders in the community to make sure that we can bring things on in an incremental process that meets the demands of folks returning. But as the chair said also, it's very fundamentally important that we maintain social distancing, that we continue to communicate the CDC guidelines and all the approaches as we take a very prudent, incremental process of returning service back. I want to make one other comment, though. The essentialness of transit has clearly been demonstrated. Secretary Chow just recently recognized all the transit workers in the country because we've been keeping folks going to health care, getting the health care workers back to the Texas Medical Center, getting employees to the grocery stores to benefit the folks in our community during this very difficult period. So transit's an extremely essential service, and we're very pleased that our frontline employees have continued to support this community. We're very pleased of their commitment, and we will now work collectively in what are the real strategies and the right approaches to work with the business community, work with others in our community to have a very smart approach of bringing services back as we get people back to work.
Let me bring Tory in here for a minute. Tory, what are you seeing in the literature nationally about will there be reluctance from people to go back to transit? I mean, in much the same way there's going to be reluctance about people getting back on airplanes and flying. I mean, any place you have a closed space with a bunch of people packed into it, we know that environment is going to make it is an environment where the virus can transmit more easily. What are you seeing in the national literature about any reluctance or the fear of there being a reluctance of transit riders in the future?
Absolutely. It's the early data is showing that the driving is coming back much faster than the transit. I would say the Asia example shows, because they've had previous pandemics, that the transit ridership will eventually come back. Masks will probably become more common and normal. You won't be surprised even 2 years from now to see people wearing masks. But it really will probably come down to the choice versus the non-choice riders. I think a lot of the non-choice will come back quicker, and the people who have a choice will probably delay, will probably push. I think in Metro's case, you'll see the local buses come back quicker than the park and rides. I think a lot of people will choose to drive. In fact, we unfortunately may end up with even worse rush hours next year because more and more people choose to drive who otherwise would have taken the park and ride.
Yeah.
The park and ride takes Seth Spieler, whom we all know and who I think we all respect, has made the point that the park and rides take 50% of the commuters that come into the business districts off the roads. So that just shows you, without the park and rides, how congested our highways and our HOVs and our rather our regular lanes would be coming into work.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question that the park and rides and the HOV lanes really reduce the traffic on the other lanes a lot. Carrin, what are y'all seeing as your effect on your sales tax collections? I noticed that for the last month, the public numbers, I think you're down about 10% compared to the same month last year, but I guess that's March collections. Do you have any kind of forecast on how this is going to affect your sales tax collections?
Well, obviously they will be dramatically down. That's about what we know right now. And Art Smiley, our CFO, is in the process of crunching all of those numbers, and he feels that we will know something that is really valid in June. I asked him in preparation for the show what his response was to that, and he said, we really need to wait till June, but of course we're going to take a big hit, no question about it.
This is obviously affecting your fare box revenue as well, but that's a much smaller piece of your overall revenue stream, so I'm assuming that's not going to be as significant as the effect on the sales tax. Is that a
yes,
correct
that's
assumption?
absolutely correct. Only about 7% of our revenue comes from fare box, and in fact, so little comes from fare box that Tory had encouraged us to do a study as to whether we could just abolish fares altogether, as a way of both giving relief to the community and possibly increasing our ridership. And we did look at that with Tory's help, and it turned out not to be feasible because there are a lot of cost-free fares that aren't visible until you really dig down into it. But no, fares are not an appreciable part. It's nice to have that 7%, but that's not what will hurt us. The sales tax decline is what we will have to manage.
I just want to point out that Tory actually stole that idea from me.
Did he?
Yeah.
That's the way he is.
I wrote an op-ed, I think it was in 2010, wasn't it, or something
It's
like that?
been quite a while.
Yeah.
I think you did.
Actually, he didn't see it, so when he got it, he said, great minds and all that.
That's Tory.
Well, the ironic thing.
What?
Oh, well, the ironic thing is now you are running the free transit experiment, and you may be forced to keep it longer than you maybe would
That's
like.
Exactly right. That's exactly
we'll see
right.
how it plays out.
I wanted to build back on that, too. As the chair mentioned earlier, as Tory just mentioned, we have suspended fares, and that's part of our strategy to make sure that we're appropriately responding to social distancing. And one other thing, because we're looking at incremental steps, I think everybody knows we operate about a 100-mile HOV network in the region. We will begin opening the HOV lanes Monday morning for those individuals that can carpool and those individuals that can use the hot lanes as well. That's part of our incremental strategy of beginning to bring back different service elements that help people move in the community.
Okay. I want to get into the effect of this on Metro Next in our next segment here. Unfortunately, y'all are such a great guest. I'm not going to get to even half the stuff I wanted to talk about today. But Carrin and Tom, if y'all can, I'd love to have y'all back. But if y'all can think for a minute during the break about what's going to be the effect of this on the Metro Next plan that the voters approved last year. I want to talk about that next segment. We'll be right back. This is Bill King with Common Sense Talk Radio, 950 AM. And we're back with more Common Sense Talk Radio. This is Bill King. My guest today, Carrin Patman, Metro Board Chair, Tom Lambert, Metro CEO, and Tory Gattis, Houston blogger on all things transit. I wanted to ask Tom or Carrin, whichever wants to answer the question, about do you think that this epidemic is going to have any impact on your ability to execute on the Metro Next plan that the voters approved last year?
Well, it will have an ability, it will have an effect on the schedule of it because the bonds that are issued are sales tax bonds. And so we're not going to do anything imprudent. I mean, we of course we're going to try to implement the plan on the schedule that we can because it passed with almost 70% of the vote and has widespread support in the community. Even Tory gave it an A-. He's a very tough grader. It should have been an A. But
hey, Carrin, I gave it a better grade than you thought I was going to.
You sure did. So anyway, but yeah, I brought my average down, and A- actually brought it up. But yes, we will have to slow that down.
As I recall, there's some financial sort of gate posts you've got to go through.
There are,
and so I assume that's going to affect those. As you say, probably as at least the timing of it.
Yes, exactly. And I'll leave it to Tom to talk about what we can start on now. We were going to start anyway with enhanced bus service, the boost corridors, which you're both familiar with that have certain, in fact, you mentioned the smart cities grid or the smart traffic grids. I mean, boost corridors have an edge in terms of going through the stoplight and some other innovations like that, and we were going to start with 2 of those anyway, and those are less expensive, and so I'm not sure that it will slow that down that much. However, in terms of the major capital expenditures, yes, we're going to have to take it a little more slowly, but I do believe we'll be able to do it. Under no circumstances are we going to get ourselves in jeopardy financially, because as you know, we have a AAA bond rating. There are constraints that we were pleased to put in the referendum that keep us from getting out ahead of our skis, and we have very good reserves. And it's a tremendous job generator. So we need to get moving with it to help our economy rebound as soon as we can. But no question but that it will be at a slower pace.
Okay. Let me switch
But I would like to say that we are moving forward. The Inter-Katy Bus Rapid Transit Corridor, we did get funding from the Transportation Policy Council at HGAC. So we're working very closely with TxDOT now to move forward on an Inter-Katy BRT. That will basically connect the Northwest Transit Center that we have at 610 and I-10 all the way into downtown. We're moving forward very aggressively on universal accessibility. We've done an assessment of all 9,000 of Metro's bus stops, and we know those stops that need to be corrective to be fully accessible by the disabled community. We've also moved forward to make sure that we can connect sidewalks. Because if sidewalks are not connected, then people cannot safely access transit. So we're moving forward with universal accessibility to make sure those stops are accessible, sidewalks are connected, customer amenities are there to improve that ridership experience. And then as the chair mentioned, we're also moving forward on the boost corridors, the 56 Airline and the 54 Scott. We're working very closely with the city on the 56 and the 54, and with Commissioner Ellis on the 54, to look at those things that we can speed up the transit service. So we're looking at a traffic signal coordination plan where we'll put features on the buses that will talk to controllers that will actually allow us to get more reliable travel times, give us better running times, make that service more reliable, and be able to communicate more directly with our customers so they have confidence and how that service is going to get them where they need to go. So we're moving forward in these projects and other things to improve the current system, as the chair mentioned, as we're looking at re-strategizing how we roll out Metro next.
Okay, great. I want to switch for a second to talk about transit a little more generally and talk about ridership. We've all 4 of us have talked about this in the past, that there's been an absolute decline in U.S. transit ridership since about 2014. There's been a per capita decline since about 2008. And Tory, I want to start with you on this. And can you give us a little bit of background about this, what variation there is around the country, what people are thinking about, what the causes of it? Just tell us what your thoughts are about this phenomenon we've been seeing now for quite a few years.
Sure, Bill. The New York Times has pointed out we're back to 1970s level in terms of transit ridership. Generally speaking, across the country, it's in decline. I'm glad that Houston's been able to stay about even, which is great in the current environment. There's a couple of agencies like Seattle that have done well, but generally speaking, substantial declines. There's all kinds of debate about the reasons for this. Obviously, shared rides like Uber and Lyft are a big deal. Delivery services are a big deal. You've got they did a study in LA and found that just the booming economy previous to this led to a lot of people buying used cars that previously would have ridden transit. And so there's been a lot of things that have just sort of contributed, nickeling, just kind of chipped away at the ridership over the last 5-10 years. And
what is the thinking about? People think those trends are going to continue or not, or what's the expectation in the future?
I think the expectation is that they will continue. The next big issue is, if they do get to these autonomous taxi services, and there's a lot of debate about how soon those are coming. I've seen some very impressive demo videos lately that make me think sooner rather than later. That takes 75% of the cost out of an Uber or Lyft if it's autonomous. And at that point, I think you could see almost a tidal wave of people switching over to the autonomous taxis.
Now, as you point out, Houston has done a little better than the rest of the country has, in that our ridership has been pretty flat.
Right.
What are your thoughts? I want to hear what Carrin and Tom have to say, but what are your thoughts about why Houston's doing a little better than the rest of the country?
I think the network redesign from a few years ago was absolutely critical to that. They made the network far more efficient and did just a whole ton of small improvements. These are not the big capital improvement ribbon cutting kinds of things, but the small stuff that really makes a difference to the average rider and helped hold on to those riders.
Right. Yes, and actually, overall, our population, while it's been stable in the last few years, overall our ridership has gone up since 2012. So we are confounding those national trends. And I agree with Tory. I think a lot of the smaller steps, not to mention the dramatic reimagining, rebuilding the system from scratch, to really serve who it's supposed to serve and not be obsolete, made a huge difference. But I think that the one place I probably have a different view from Tory is on the idea of what autonomous vehicles will be doing. Because let's think about the fact that autonomous vehicles are cars. And as long as you have cars carrying one person, you are vastly increasing the congestion, and you're vastly increasing the pollution, because once you increase the congestion, people are idling in traffic again, and that all causes a lot of pollution. So you're still going to need vehicles that can carry large numbers of people. Consider these facts. About 35% of the peak period work trips to downtown are on transit, about 28% to the medical center. Now, if you didn't have people carpooling through transit, essentially, buses carrying large numbers of people, then you would have overwhelming congestion. And that's not going to change with an autonomous Uber or autonomous vehicle. They're still cars. They're not a solution to transit. And I think, there was a presentation by Philippe Kampsoff of McKinsey to the transportation group at the partnership, and he made the point that in order for these ride sharing, there's some thought that, Uber will become autonomous, or there'll just be autonomous vehicles in general that will somehow magically remove the need for transit. They are not the solution unless you have massive carpooling, and unless they're able to take multiple people. And the only way people will really be incentivized to ride them is if you have individual pods for people, sort of like you do on even better than a Vaughn lane. So they're really not a solution, and I don't think we should kid ourselves that they will be. And furthermore,
Carrin, let me stop you there for a second. We got to take another quick break. We'll be back in just a second. I want you to continue that thought, and I also want to hear from y'all about what you think car share riding companies, Uber and Lyft, what effect they've had. And let's talk about that on the other side of the break. Be right back. Common Sense Talk Radio. We're talking all things transit. And we finished off that last session talking about the future of autonomous vehicles. And Tory, I know this is something you've looked at a lot. What do you think about the effect of autonomous vehicles on transit in the future?
I think Carrin's absolutely right that we would face a congestion issue if they each hold only one person. But what I like to point out to people is if we can get the average to two people, we cut the congestion in half. You have half as many vehicles. And with the rise of Uber Pool and some like this, where they can carry 2 or 3 people on a shared ride that are going from broadly the same source place to the same destination, then you can really address a lot of those congestion issues. It's unknown what the impact on demand for transit will be, but it is a big question mark over the next few years.
Well, I just think, first of all, we provide van pool services now, and we have 557 van pools ourselves, and so that can be done through the transit agency. But any time, unless you are moving large numbers of people during peak times, cutting the congestion in half is not going to be adequate. And I'm not saying, we have an Office of Innovation, and Kim Williams, who heads it, that office spends all its time looking at what innovations are out there in the country, when are they coming online, in fact, in the world, and how can we use those to better improve our transit system. And certainly autonomous vehicles are a way, because autonomous vehicles can be part of transit. Uber and Lyft can certainly ferry people from points to transit points. And in fact, a lot of people have suggested that's a wonderful way to use Uber and Lyft or autonomous vehicles when they come online, is to give portal-to-portal service from folks' homes to transit, where they then get on and don't cause a lot of congestion into downtown. But without an actual plan, it's so easy to theorize about these things and say, oh, this will be the magical solution. But, you're still going to require, either they're going to circle around like Ubers do now and cripple congestion even after they drop people off, waiting for another ride to be called in, and they've had horrible problems with that in New York, or you're going to have massive parking lots where they sit waiting to go pick up the same people. And again, we have van pool services now. So I just don't, where people pay their own way, and we facilitate setting those up. And so, these theoretical concepts of you just never know till you really get to the drawing boards and see what can really, really be done. But we will be on top of that. And if, in fact, there is a way to lower costs through the use of autonomous vehicles or through partnering with ride-sharing companies, we'll be the first to do that.
Carrin, do y'all have any idea how it's affected ridership in Houston? I mean, do we have any idea how many people have stopped taking transit and decided to take the ride-sharing services instead?
Well, we don't, because they won't share their data, and that's another problem. I mean, they won't pick up in underserved communities. They won't pick up disabled folks because they're not equipped to do it. They won't share their data, and including safety data. So, no, we don't. But my instinct tells me it's not much, because first of all, they're not competitive with transit economically now. And if they were charging what they really had to charge to make a profit, as we all read on a regular basis, they're hemorrhaging money. And so you have situations where, they make it, so they're not, once in fact they are able to charge, if ever, what would make them profitable entities, then they're even going to be less competitive with transit. And you have this. But to
be fair, if riders had to pay for the total cost of transit, because like you said, your fare box is only covering 7% or something of your revenue. If transit riders had to pay for the full cost of transit, then it probably wouldn't have as much ridership either, right? I mean.
Well, that's certainly true. Transit's a subsidized service because it keeps the economy moving in Houston, and it's a valuable service that it provides. And in my opinion, it ought to be provided by an independent governmental entity like Metro, because otherwise, once you start relying on private companies like Uber, you see what's happening, and they don't even treat their workers according to the workers fairly now, and they're operating at a massive loss. And so, and they're not, and again, I'm repeating myself, but they're not reliable. You have to have reliable transit service that goes from point A to point B, and will definitely show up and won't charge you surge pricing. You spend $10 to get to the rodeo. A couple of years ago, the Chronicle wrote about this, and then it cost $100 to get home. So I just don't think these models have proven have been borne out. And I believe if they were charging the full freight, it would be higher than the subsidy to transit. Now, there I'm just guessing because I haven't done a study on it. But, I just don't think there's any reason to believe they'd be a more economically viable option.
Let me get Tom back in the conversation for a second. Tom, to what extent do you think transit can learn from the ride sharing? I mean, is there something about their models that can be utilized and incorporated into transit to make it more convenient and more competitive?
I think Metro's already doing that, and as the chair mentioned earlier, we do have an Office of Innovation, so we're really trying to be ahead of the curve. I'll give you a couple examples real quick. One, our community connector services that basically serve neighborhoods and then tie them back into the longer haul transit routes. That's in essence a model back on Uber or Lyft by serving a community connector neighborhood. We're looking at apps right now. Actually, prior to the COVID-19, we have been working on basically an Uber-type app to actually get more of a direct service within neighborhoods. So we see that opportunity coming forward. We've also been working with a consortium of other providers across the country on an autonomous vehicle bus consortium of how do you make sure that you can have autonomous buses that don't exist today, but working with others across the country to get a design standard that would allow us to look at autonomous bus movements on the HOV network we've already invested in this region. So we're very much in the forefront of doing that. So we think where there are lessons learned, we're going to continue to do so.
Tory, I know you've talked about this concept of smart streets and for these express streets,
max lanes,
and how those might fit into all this. Max lanes. I'm sorry, I forgot the term.
It's the idea of max lanes is just it's sort of an evolution of the HOV lanes that your goal is to move the maximum number of people at maximum speed and the benefit is that they're super flexible, that they can adapt to these autonomous vehicles, to autonomous buses, to whatever the technology does. They're adaptable. They get people from where they are to where they need to go. It serves all the job centers across Houston. It's just so much more flexible and affordable than commuter rail or heavy rail or any of these sorts of things. So it's just the sort of system that really works for Houston and can really adapt no matter what these autonomous technologies do.
You know, Carrin, Tom, I really let you guys off the hook on light rail this morning. Today, I was hoping to get to that, but we've run out of time. Sometime I want y'all to come back just so I can beat you up on light rail for a solid hour.
Oh, wait a minute. I didn't agree to that.
Listen, I want to thank you all so much for coming. I cannot believe that our hour is already gone, but I hope that I can get all three of y'all back here to continue this conversation about transit in the near future. This is Bill King, Common Sense Talk Radio on KPRC 950 AM. We'll be back next week at same time, same place, and we'll be talking about the city's finances. It's always a challenge, but it's gotten much worse with the price of oil dropping and the pandemic. I'll see you next Saturday at 2 o'clock, KPRC Radio 950 AM, Common Sense Talk Radio.